Welcome to a Wonder Junkie podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Anderson, and if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate the show. That helps people to discover it on Spotify, YouTube, iTunes, and it's also on Rumble. Enjoy the episode.
What we call reality is in fact nothing more than a culturally sanctioned and linguistically reinforced hallucination.
All right, Del, thank you so much for joining me.
Absolutely, Ryan. It's good to be here.
Yeah, I've been following your work for quite a few years now, since probably 2020, and I had your attorney on my show. I've had Dr. Peter McCullough, Aaron Siri, different people who are speaking on the subject about vaccines, and it's become something that I feel has been sort of swept under the rug a little bit to a lot of the population for different reasons, and you seem to have been investigating it more than anybody, so I thought it'd be nice to have you on, and I do appreciate you for all the work you're doing.
Thank you. Well, thanks for having me on, and yeah, it's more than swept under the rug. I think it's one of the biggest cover-ups and frauds in the history of the world. Which is why I'm passionate about it. It's a super interesting investigation. I agree with you. I don't think any, I am a journalist or a television producer by trade, so I don't think anyone from my perspective and position has ever done a deeper dive into this topic than I have. But let's get into, I'll follow your lead on where you want to go on that, because obviously I have and do talk for days.
Absolutely. So I did watch your film that just came out, An Inconvenient Study, and it was pretty mind-blowing. And I had already seen and heard a lot of the stuff that we're going to get into, but I do appreciate the work you did with that film, and I'd love to go into some of that. But first, for the people that haven't really heard a lot about you, or maybe people that have an idea about who you are that may be wrong, I'd love for you to just describe how the heck did you even get so passionate about this subject when you made the film Vaxxed and then this current film?
Well, by nature, I'm a passionate person. I always have been. But really, what puts me into this conversation, I was a producer on the daytime talk show, The Doctors at CBS. I worked there for many, many years, probably, I think, 6 or 7 years on that. Before that, I was a producer on the Dr. Phil show. So I come from a very unique space of psychology, medicine, and sciences as entertainment for the world. I won an Emmy Award working on the Doctor's television show. But so for people to understand what I do, I'm not like the producer of the show. I'm not the executive producer. I would produce one episode every single week. My job was to fill a whole hour of the Doctors that will air on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. And so there was, 7 of us that each would produce a show every single week. But I was one of the more controversial producers. I did very challenging stories, especially for daytime talk, which is what it was, a daytime talk show that talked about sciences and medicine. But I was really into, if I was going to do that job, I wanted to sort of really push the envelope. And so I would do stories like when Monsanto when their product glyphosate that sprayed on 90% of our crops in America, that ruling came from the WHO back in 2015. So I reached out to Monsanto and said, would you like to defend your product, Roundup, on the Doctor's television show? And they said, yes, we would actually. We're going to send our head of toxicology, Donna Farmer, onto the show. And then I reached out to a top GMO activist that had written books about Monsanto, against Monsanto, and had a debate on the show. And so things that you wouldn't normally expect on a medical talk show, I was behind the scenes using that space to really challenge the establishment. It bothers me when companies get away with, being sued, and you see the billions of dollars they made, but what about all the people that got injured before they admitted that the product was faulty or a drug was faulty? So I was always doing those types of stories. So that's sort of how I'm wired. And so what really catapulted me into this issue of vaccine was I was working with a doctor on one of these controversial shows who said to me one day, you probably don't want to have me on your show. I was like, well, why? You're the one that's at the heart of this very intriguing issue. And he said, well, because if you look me up online, I'm considered a quack. I was like, why? He's like, well, I'm one of these doctors that believes that vaccines cause autism. I said, oh, I said, well, that has nothing to do with the story we're doing now. He's like, I know, I just don't want to undermine the show. I was like, I'll worry about that, you know. And then he said to me, would you ever cover that story? I said, probably not. I mean, you know, on the doctor's television show, we were pretty sure that vaccines are safe and effective, and we really pushed that narrative. I said, but I will say this, I'm open to any story if it's got, you know, the right type of information, if it can be proven. So if something big changes in that space, something that we haven't already seen that could somehow connect vaccines and autism, I'm all ears, send it my way. And so a year later, he reached out to me and said, remember when you said if there's anything on the vaccine autism front that was changing? I said, yeah. He said, there's a whistleblower inside the CDC named Dr. William Thompson, who is going to come forward in about 2 weeks. It's going to come out that he has explained how they committed scientific fraud in the vaccine safety studies. So I pitched that story, just the idea of it, to my executives at the doctor. Said, look, I might have to jump on what could be one of the biggest stories in our lifetime. I explained it to them. They said, are you crazy? We are not going to, you know, do a story about the CDC and that they're committing fraud and piss off the CDC, who were friends at the doctors, obviously, our show. We don't want to mess with Merck, who makes the MMR vaccine, which was the heart of this story, the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, and autism. So anyway, I hit a dead wall there, but it didn't stop me from looking into it. And the deeper I looked into it, the more intrigued I was by that story and realized I think there's really something here. So I ended up leaving television to make a documentary about that whistleblower called Vaxxed, From Cover Up to Catastrophe. And a lot of people credit that film with igniting the medical freedom movement around the world. We, you know, played to sold out audiences every single day, 5 days a week for an entire year. I traveled the country. Dynamic story, incredible, powerful, heart-wrenching stories from parents who watched their children regress into autism right after a vaccine. And then to see the scientists, the CDC, showing us how they committed fraud when they looked into it, that they did see a correlation between the vaccine and autism and tried to hide that, or did hide that from the public. So all of that immediately cast me in the limelight of this conversation, because anyone that decides to go near the vaccine issue at all, especially back in 2016 when our film released, you're suddenly the demon to the world. I mean, everyone hates you. You're dangerous. This isn't true. This is a conspiracy theory. It wasn't lost on me that I would be getting into some of that. It was bigger than I realized. But standing in that, I knew what we had seen. I knew the science behind what I was reporting, just as I reported anything on the doctors. And so to really further that investigation, I started a nonprofit at the end of 2016 called the Informed Consent Action Network, or ICANN. I also started my own internet talk show called The Highwire, and I hired a team of scientists to study every study or trial that had been done on the vaccines, especially the childhood vaccines inside the U.S. Program. And I hired a constitutional attorney named Aaron Siri, because unlike any other product, this one is protected from liability, can't sue the manufacturers. We needed a way around that, or some way to get to the truth that was being hidden. And so we ended up suing the government. I started suing the FDA, the NIH, CDC, Health and Human Services. Since they're the ones protecting the industry from liability, we were suing them. And so that started in 2016, end of 2016. I've been at it ever since. And then, of course, COVID hit and changed the world as we knew it. That really just helped the world understand what I was already saying on my show, what we were already learning from the lawsuits that we were winning, which is this is a giant fraud. This vaccine program has never been proven to be safe. It very well, and most likely in many of these vaccines, are probably more dangerous than the diseases that we were protecting you from. And the overall cumulative effect of this vaccine program appears to be, based on the film that I just released, an Inconvenient Study, and every study done in the world so far that's compared vaccinated to unvaccinated children shows that the vaccinated are far sicker. Chronic disease rates are through the roof. I think you can really put a lot of that on the shoulders of our vaccine program. And so that's what puts me into it. It was sort of, I backed my way into the investigation. But once I was on it, I realized this represents everything that's wrong in America and, frankly, the world. But It's corporate corruption at the highest levels. The pharmaceutical industry is the most powerful lobby in Washington, outspending oil and gas 2 to 1. It's buying governments, as we saw with COVID. That was a pharmaceutical attack on the world that tried to scare us all into taking a product that hadn't been properly safety tested. They got billions of dollars invested into a technology they couldn't make work, and I think used that pandemic as a way to get an investment into mRNA technology and try to push it over the top, rushed it on the market, rushed it into people, used the government to force people to take it. I mean, the whole thing is one of the biggest disasters of all times, has claimed so many lives. I think we may never really truly get the grasp of what took place there. But that woke a lot of people up, which is why you can even do this podcast today, or why I'm on all these podcasts around the world, because we were even being censored when we were talking about this during COVID. And I think that just woke people up even more to say, what is going on here? So that's the backstory on what puts us here today.
Yeah, I'm grateful that you shared that. And I think a lot of the big problem is, before we dive into your new film, is the censorship. And I wanted to know, like, how much censorship were you dealing with before COVID and now currently with this film? Like, even yesterday, before I was taking some notes to get prepared for today, and just Googling basic elements of your name and this film, it's incredible how many search results, if you use Google or ChatGPT, that it will bury. And I myself have had McCullough and others on. They get shadow banned, and there's algorithms now that control the ether. And I think it's just psyops and psychological warfare. And I think that seems to be the more dangerous component to this whole thing, because if you control the minds and you control the narrative, nobody has the ability to critically think, which is what has the underlying driver for that psychological ideology. Like Aaron talked about it, Vaccines, Amen. And when I read that book, it's like, yeah, this is sort of like an ideology, a religion. But the underlying technology that, like, Robert Malone speaks to is that this is the most sophisticated psyop in human history.
Yeah, and you have to ask yourself why, right? Like, that's what I've really been diving into on my show, The High Wire, recently. What is the motivation behind all this? And yes, have I been censored? Definitely. I mean, the Vax, when Vax came out in the beginning of 2016, we were kicked out of Tribeca Film Festival. I had never heard of a film ever being kicked out of a festival before it had the opportunity to screen. And when we asked why, they said, well, there's some scientific errors. We said, then what are they? We have the right to defend the film and show you our science and our evidence. They refused to tell us what was wrong with the film. I think that shows you, I mean, in any space, I suppose we could have sued, except that in the end, it made for such great advertising. Getting lambasted, getting kicked out of Tribeca became just this tidal wave of negative press that only made people more curious. So it had the effect I wanted to have, which was we packed audiences around the world, and hundreds of millions of people have now seen Vax. But at the heart of it is something really, truly terrifying, which is censorship and the destruction of freedom of speech. And it's why I got involved in politics, which wasn't something that I'd ever done before. But after COVID, I joined Robert Kennedy Jr., and I was his director of communications when he ran for president of the United States, mostly because, and we started as Democrats, we ended up joining Donald Trump at the very end. But the party I grew up in, as a liberal progressive from Boulder, Colorado, was suddenly stating it was going to end misinformation. That's censorship. And let's say there was misinformation. People have a right to put out misinformation, frankly. I mean, that is how our First Amendment right is designed, whether it's your opinion or you're lying or you're making up stories or whatever. You have a freedom to do those things, right? And people have the freedom to listen to you or not listen to you. In this case, though, it was our government that was misinforming us. It was our government that told us that the COVID vaccine would stop transmission. It was 95% effective at doing so. They gave $10 billion, our government spent brainwashing us through our news to tell us how effective the vaccine was. Now we know it wasn't. And by the way, I knew it wasn't from day one, not because I was guessing, but I saw their internal documents. After all the research we'd done since 2017 on the trials of vaccines, I knew how the sausage was made. I knew how they commit the fraud. I was trying to get people to listen to me, but COVID, I was like, oh, this is great. Now I'm going to be able to explain exactly how they're doing it as they're doing it. And I'm going to shift the consciousness of the world around this conversation. And that's what I did. I said, look, here's the emergency use authorization. This is what the FDA just did to approve the vaccine prior to being done with safety trials. It's not done proving safety, but they're going to rush it on the market. But right here in the EUA, it says the trials did not determine if the vaccine could stop transmission. So I'm like, I told my show that before anyone received that vaccine. I said, when you're hearing 95% effective, it's a lie. I showed them. I could bring, here it is on my show. This is the quote from the FDA. And so it exploded for us. The High Wire, my show had 250,000 viewers per episode prior to COVID. By the middle of COVID, we had 7 million people watching every episode. And, you know, I think it really shifted the conversation. But that censorship also, we lost our Facebook channel, we lost our YouTube channel, and we were just a social media, you know, show. I was just using, you know, Twitter and Facebook and YouTube to broadcast the work that we were doing. Luckily, we saw the writing on the wall. I saw people being censored. I'd already had my film kicked out, you know, years earlier. I knew what they were capable of. So we had really built a robust website and our own player and our own way to survive if every other third-party company decided to censor us. And that's what we did. In the end, we generated our own videos. We hosted our own videos. And the High Wire stayed up and running, and I think was effective at waking up a lot of people around the world. So censorship is real and scary. And then back to the political point, you know, when you had a party saying we are going to end misinformation, but they were the ones that lied about the vaccine's abilities. They lied about social distancing. There was no science behind that. I stated that on my show. I even said where we believe the idea came from. Tony Fauci recently has admitted to the Congress, yeah, we just made that up. So again, no science behind that. I followed the science of ivermectin, of hydroxychloroquine. Studies now, you know, of millions of people around the world show that hydroxychloroquine reduced the death rate by 50%. So we could have saved half the people that died in America had we made hydroxychloroquine available, and had we promoted it, God knows where it would have been. Ivermectin even more so. They called it horse paste. Around the world, it's 80% effective at reducing death from COVID. So I believe Tony Fauci and the people that orchestrated the attack on drugs that worked. It was the same as the Tuskegee experiment. To deny someone penicillin, you know, who has syphilis, or that you even gave syphilis to, which was the Tuskegee experiment, that's illegal. Well, that's what they did during COVID. They denied people access to a drug that would have saved most of their lives. So the crimes against humanity are massive. And when you start calling out your own government and stating things like crimes against humanity, yeah, you're in a front row seat to censorship. And if the government's saying they're going to end misinformation, what they mean is we're going to end information that goes against our narrative. And by the way, that's any authoritarian government in the world. That is what makes America special, is we don't allow that. We don't allow our government to determine what is and is not the truth. COVID tried to do that. Look how well that went, you know. So here we are.
God, it's a mess. And most people, like when I'm out in the world, I just feel like most people are like, we're done with this. Let's stop talking about it. And I don't think people realize just how dangerous that is to just move on without holding people accountable. And recently, when I had Aaron on, your attorney, I had to dig into his deposition with Stanley Plotkin. And that was multiple hours where he put him to the test. And I hear people like Sam Harris, these people that are popular, and they say, if you're not a doctor, this appeal to authority, if you're not a doctor, then you have no business speaking to the subject. And Aaron spoke so eloquently about the subject. He goes, I don't have to appeal to titles. I have to present data. And when he started to grill this Stanley Plotkin guy, who's considered the godfather of vaccines, he got destroyed. It was almost embarrassing, and it was horrible. Can you speak a little bit to that piece before we dive into this film? Because I think that was so important.
Oh, it was massive. I mean, it was one of several miracles that happened, you know, over the years working on ICANN and the High Wire, and certainly with Aaron Siri. I got a call from a mother up in Detroit She was in a custody battle over her, I believe it was her daughter, young girl who her and her husband had not vaccinated, but now that they were divorced, he was using the threat of vaccination as a way to, manipulate custody and things like that. And the case got apparently so much visibility that they decided to bring in the world's greatest authority on vaccines, Dr. Stanley Plotkin, to give some context. The number one, the biggest book, the Bible on vaccines, is what they call it. It's called Plotkin's Vaccines. That's how big this guy is. When they're having the ACIP meetings, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, ACIP meetings just happened last week, where they removed hepatitis B from recommendation for healthy mothers, babies. That ACIP meeting starts with a rap of a gavel. The gavel is called the Plotkin gavel. Okay, so that gives you some sense of how big a deal this guy is. So she said they're bringing this guy Stanley Plotkin to be the expert witness on why my daughter should be vaccinated. I reached out to Aaron, says, is there anything we can do? He said, let me talk to the lawyers on her team and see if I could depose him. And he did. They agreed to it. And it's a 9-hour deposition of Dr. Stanley Plotkin. You can watch the whole thing or just the excerpts of it at our website, thehighwire.com. Just search Plotkin, Plotkin. It'll probably go down as one of the most important depositions ever done. And essentially all it is you watch all of the confidence and the mountains of evidence that we hear about that vaccines are safe and effective, or that vaccines don't cause autism. Stanley Plotkin, in multiple occasions in that deposition, basically has to admit that there is no science. It doesn't exist. And that's what, if I was to just generalize, you have to watch it yourself, because it's so incredibly shocking, some of the moments. I remember when Aaron first got done with it, the video wasn't even available for like a year. He sent me the transcript though I could read it. And, I was a screenwriter, in my earlier days in Hollywood. And I mean, it read like A Few Good Men. You're waiting for Stanley Plotkin to scream, you can't handle the truth. At some point, every page, Aaron was just leading him down the road. But the long and short of what you realize there, and in all the lawsuits and all the work that we've done, when you hear this statement that there is no evidence that vaccines blank, there is no evidence that vaccines cause autism, there is no evidence that vaccines cause harm. We heard it multiple times from the doctors on the panel at ACIP this week. There is no evidence that Hep B causes any injury to day one old babies. Why are we reconsidering this? Well, what you realize is there is no evidence, period. There is no science at all. None exists. Whether it's because no one cared to look or they're afraid to look, which I think is really what you get behind is the motivation. They're so afraid that they'll find an issue that they avoid doing any science. But what you find out is no science exists. There is no real science showing that vaccines do not cause autism. I know because I sued the CDC. I said, look, let's just take the first 6 vaccines in the first 6 months of life. Send me all the trials you rely upon to say that those vaccines don't cause autism. Of course, Aaron Siri handled that case. We spent over a year in court against the CDC. In the end, they sent us 20 studies that did not include any of the 6 vaccines that we give our kids, the ones we're asking about. So what they're essentially saying is we don't have any science for hepatitis B, DTaP vaccine, polio vaccine, showing that they don't cause autism, period. So there's no mountain there, at least for these vaccines. There's nothing that exists at all. They got nothing at all. And what they did send is what you see is there's been a bunch of manipulated studies around just the MMR vaccine. One of them is the Heart of the Study Vax, the documentary I made. That was a fraud. That's the most important, study ever done on autism. And the whistleblower in the CDC shows us how they committed fraud to make that study get the results it got. And so really the 20 studies are MMR and then some on thimerosal, which was the mercury containing ingredient. And there's no mercury in these first 6 vaccines given the first 6 months. So with Plotkin, with Catherine Edwards, we've also deposed. She's also a co-author on the vaccine Bible, Plotkin's Vaccines. She's also been on the stand and once again was walked through every vaccine. She's there to say vaccines don't cause autism in a different case. And then when you ask her, do you have a study that DTaP doesn't cause autism? She'll say, well, I don't have a study that shows that it does or that it doesn't. No study at all. Oh, so then why are you saying it doesn't cause autism? And what you realize is all of this is built on assumptions, wishful thinking, forceful propaganda, and that becomes very, very problematic when you look at how much injury is now happening. When you look at the rates of autism, and you know, I just covered this last week on my show. If someone wants a motive, then imagine this: when our government took on liability for the, you know, any lawsuit against vaccines. So they protected the industry for the first time ever. And why were they doing it? Because in 1986, the industry, the last remaining handful of vaccine makers, said, we are losing so much money from lawsuits on death and injury from our products, we cannot make a profit. Now, we've watched them lose lawsuits on drugs. They still made a profit. We watched them lose lawsuits on talcum powder recently, found out they always knew it caused cervical cancer. Johnson & Johnson's baby powder, this great company for babies, was poisoning babies for 50 years. They made a profit. This product was so much worse than those that they cannot make a profit. So our government takes on the liability. And then there's a moment in early 2000, and they ended up having a case in 2007. 5,000 children were lined up now in this court suing the government. They want to be suing the manufacturers, but now they're forced because of this liability protection to sue the government. They were suing for autism caused by the vaccine. They had videos of their children saying, I love you, mommy, I love you, daddy, running around the house. And then that day they take them to get their vaccines. And then you see them screaming, crying that night, projectile vomiting or diarrhea, unable to walk or move, and suddenly you realize those are the last words we were ever going to hear from that baby. I mean, the evidence is so compelling, it's mind-blowing. And the cases at that moment in the vaccine court, they were paying $5 million per case. Okay, $5 million per case of autism, because there's a lifelong injury. They're going to be in diapers all the way into adults. Someone's going to have to take care of them every step of the way. And so 5,000 cases were lined up. And instead of trying those cases in vaccine court, they pulled out 6 cases and said, we will try these 6 cases. And if one of them we prove causes autism, then all of these people will have their day in court. It's called the omnibus proceedings. It was a fraud because the second case was so obviously autism. Even their state's leading witness that had said in the previous case there's no vaccines that cause autism said, I just discovered in this child, I just discovered the mechanism. And what did they do? They pulled that case out. They hid it from the public. They settled with that family for $20 million and then told the world we didn't have any cases that showed autism. It doesn't exist. So the whole thing was a fraud right there. And when you think, why? Why commit fraud? Well, 5,000 cases at $5 million apiece is $25 billion. God. That was how much our vaccine court system was staring at. It scared the hell out of our government. It was going to bankrupt not just our vaccine, compensation program. It was going to bankrupt our entire health program. And now, when you look at, we have somewhere around 3 million to 3.5 million children with autism in America. Multiply that by 5 million and see if you know why there would be the biggest cover-up of all times. They're too deep in it now, Ryan. They've lied too long. It's like a crime where it started out where you just cheated on your taxes, but your secretary caught you, and then you tried to shut up your secretary and you accidentally strangled her to death, and your cleaning person saw it happen. So now you go and kill the cleaning person, and then while that was going on, your neighbor heard the kerfuffle. The cops are coming over, and you just killed 2 cops. That is how bad this thing is. Our government is destroying the lives of millions and millions of children, and they're too deep in it now. Now what do? If they admit it, literally, you're talking, that number is approximately $19 trillion if we were to pay everyone with autism in America for it being caused by vaccines. Now, does that mean all vaccines are causing autism or that vaccines are the only way autism is created? Definitely not. But we know for a fact from the case that was in that vaccine court on the proceedings, some of them definitely are. How many we don't know, because our government has absolutely committed fraud and shut down all the science and manipulated the science, as you see in the Center of Vax. And I stand by all of those statements. No one can sue me. The evidence is there. And I think this is all coming to light with Robert Kennedy Jr. at HHS. The world is about to change in a major way. And I think even people that believe in vaccines, that really want to believe, they have to now start asking themselves the question, what happened during COVID? I know that vaccine didn't work. I watched that rushed onto the market. So maybe what Dell and Bobby's saying is true. Were the other ones rushed onto the market too? Did they have proper safety tests? And there's no drug on earth that doesn't injure some people and some children. So how is it that this product would be safe and effective? Certainly it's not safe and effective for everybody. So who's it not safe and effective for? That's all that this conversation has ever been, Ryan. I am not trying to get people to stop vaccinating. What I'm trying to get is us to recognize that there are known side effects. There are warning labels wrapped around every vaccine no one is reading that include brain swelling, encephalitis, which could easily lead to a symptom like autism or Tourette's, or maybe a light brain swelling leads to ADHD. So much studies need to be done here. But what we know is our children had a chronic disease rate in the 1980s, just prior to taking away that liability, of about 12.8% was the chronic disease rate of our children. By the time we, and at that time, we're getting like 10 vaccines by the time we're 18. By 2015, we're getting 54 vaccines by the time we're 18, 72 total doses, because some of those, like DTaP, are 3 different elements, so 72 doses. And we watched the chronic disease go from 12.8% to now 54% of America's children are chronically ill, if you include obesity. Take away obesity, it's still 40%. So you're talking about a coin flip now, whether your child is going to be chronically ill their entire lives. So no matter what anyone tries to tell me, Sam Harris, you can't put doctors on a pedestal. They've overseen the greatest decline in human health that's ever been recorded. Under their watch, our kids went from 12% chronic disease to now more than half of them have chronic disease. And as we, continue on as adults, it's now being reported at the CDC that 76.4% of adults have chronic disease. And there really is 2 categories, either autoimmune disease or neurological or neurodevelopmental disorders, which is exactly what we see in my film, An Inconvenient Study. And so, look, we aren't having this conversation. I'm not destroying my television career at CBS to get into this investigation if we have the healthiest kids we've ever seen, if they're just these light fairy beings that are running around and breaking world records and totally healthy, then what argument is there to make? But they're not. It's the sickest generation of kids, as I've said, we've ever seen in this country. And it also makes us, we have the sickest kids in the entire industrialized world. No one's sicker than America. So something has gone off the rails. Something is wrong. Yeah. And we're not the only ones with toxic water or toxic oceans or toxic air. But we are the only ones that are this sick, and we've got to figure out why. And I think doctors are going to end up, sadly, not because they wanted to or they had any part of it, but they're useful idiots. What Sam Harris wants us to believe in is a doctor that take this to the bank. Your average pediatrician had a half-day education on the entire vaccine program in med school. A half a day. That's it. So I'm sorry, Sam. I'm not bowing down to anybody that only understood something, investigated something or learned about it for a half a day. I'll take Aaron Siri that I've watched him spend months and years investigating every trial, every study ever done, taking it and winning lawsuits against the government of the United States. Try doing that on a half a day education.
Yeah. No, it's so anti-scientific to not look at the actual studies and show the placebo studies have been manipulated. I've seen you bring up the HPV vaccine, for instance, where they say there's a placebo, but it's not an actual placebo. This kind of stuff is nefarious at its best, and then I want to stay on this subject, but now there's all this stuff about geoengineering and the same groups of people and the same investors They seem to be in this God complex where they think that they have the right to impose their will on the human beings on the planet and direct the future of humanity. And so it's like this interesting time where we're all coming to light because of the internet. And you think there's like a huge group of people that are waking up to it, but at the same time, they have this super capacity to control people's narratives so much so that you can keep people distracted more than ever before in human history. That's the Brave New World issue. This is the part that I'm most concerned with, is that most people just want the quick dopamine hit, stay distracted. They're too busy trying to stay afloat because the economy is so crazy. And so the average person that I know that's a great human being would question this conversation and just say, you know what, I don't have time to dive into this. And they move forward. And I think that's the biggest problem of our time, is the weapons of mass distraction.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's really the biggest mistake they made during COVID. The reason so many people woke up was exactly what you said. They've been getting away with this since really the beginning of the vaccine program. I think it started out as a really good idea. I think it's like anything. It was a new idea. It was novel. It had a beautiful idea, a concept to it. Can we just give a knock down the virulence of a virus and give it to you so that it doesn't actually get you sick, but it makes your body create the same antibodies so you're protected for life? It never worked. Not a single vaccine protects you for life. Never has. It's why you get 3 doses, 5 doses. It's why the adult schedule, which is a big part of the push during the pandemic, the adults aren't immune to measles anymore. Their vaccines have all worn off, but they're not going in and getting measles vaccines. And there's nowhere to force them to take it like we are the kids to go to school. So there's a real problem. The CDC isn't telling you about it, but our herd immunity is disappearing because vaccines don't last. We used to have herd immunity because lifelong immunity comes from actually catching the disease. So all of the children in the Brady Bunch episode in the early 60s or 50s, whenever that show was, that are, catching measles during the Brady Bunch, and there's a laugh track to it. All of that generation, all the baby boomers went on to give herd immunity around the world. Measles just doesn't spread because they've been this iron fortress. Well, these are the last years of the baby boomers. And when we lose them, we will lose our herd immunity. That will be the last generation that ever actually had real immunity. That's a problem. We could just do a whole show on that issue. But all of these things are coming together in what you made, which is the important point, is the science. Where's the science? It's not scientific how we're moving forward. There's a huge hubris to this. There is a God complex to this. And it's really putting us in grave danger now. There's lots of serious problems beyond being sick. If we keep rushing products like we did with COVID onto the market, and we keep then using government agency because our control over the government to force everyone to take that product, that will be a biblical mistake. That could, I think, COVID's a bad vaccine. It's going to have ruined millions, maybe hundreds of millions of lives around the world, but it didn't kill everybody. But if we keep forcing everybody to take rushed scientific products, it's only a matter of time before there's a mistake big enough that wipes out fertility for everyone that took it, or kills the generation, after us. Maybe we pass on an error. We've all seen that dystopian novel, and we're getting closer and closer to it, where there's only one woman left on the planet that can give birth. And look at our fertility rates. They're plummeting. They're crashing everywhere. It's one of my beefs with the HPV Gardasil vaccine. It causes early menopause in so many girls. Is it accidental? Is it nefarious? I can't find the smoking gun that proves they're doing this on purpose. But I do believe this. I want to make this point. What I think why they're so passionate about this vaccine program, why they are so angry at me and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and anybody else, was I do think this program is designed to control the population, not just the population's health, but the population, period. And I don't want people to take that and say, oh my God, Dell said they made the COVID vaccine to kill people. That's not what I mean. What I mean is they had a perfect function set up for a future dystopian world where they're going to want to limit or grow population based on, you want the rich people, you want the productive people to have lots of children, you want the unproductive people to have none. right? They've been talking about this since the dawn of man. What happens if we overwhelm our resources? Well, whether or not we're in that moment now, certainly Bill Gates says time and time again, reducing populations is number one goal. And he's even said we're going to reduce population through drugs and through vaccines and modern drugs. Wasn't an accident. He meant that. But what he means is if we're all lining up, which is what we were doing before COVID, I couldn't, we had 3 to 10% of people starting to question it, a tiny amount. Now I would say 50% of people are questioning the vaccine program. But that's a problem for the establishment. What they want us all lining up. We had the vaccine passport. It wasn't an accident. You think Silicon Valley only came up with the vaccine passport because COVID happened? They were working on it. This is something that is all a part of a plan. A QR code just like this one. Eep, and now my box of vaccines come out. They know what I've gotten. They know what I haven't. They also know which versions I'm getting. I don't. And what they wanted was a compliant herd-like group of people that, like Sam Harris wants to be, where he just steps into a room, they inject him, his wife, his kids, or whatever. I don't know if he's got kids, but they inject you and you never ask a question. And now all of a sudden it's shocking because all the poor people in some poor neighborhood in California, I used to, think like, let's say Compton, suddenly they're having issues giving birth. I wonder why. But over in Beverly Hills, they're having 3 or 4 kids. What's going on? Something weird. Maybe it's the water. Can't figure it out. It's the perfect delivery system for fertility control. And if you think I'm making this up, we've already caught them doing it in Kenya, Africa. A bunch of missionaries are like, why are we giving 3 tetanus vaccines only to women and not the men? They grabbed those vaccines, rushed them out, got them into laboratories. 3 separate laboratories said it's got a hormone in here that is causing infertility in women. It's designed to do that. So they were using it to, sterilize women in Kenya. By the way, we have a vaccine program in America designed especially for deer. And that vaccine program is to sterilize deer. So vaccines and sterility go hand in hand. And if there's more nefarious than that, maybe, but that is you want to talk about being God, decide who lives, who doesn't, who procreates, who doesn't. That is what I believe is at the heart of this program. So even if it was safe, I think it's always been dangerous for how they want to use it against your will. It's not safe. Yeah. And that is what, the work I've been doing has shown.
Yeah, and the people that now distrust the system will be the most vulnerable if there ever is a real pandemic because they've created this distrust. And then you could imagine that they could crank out another bioweapon out of a lab that might be actually deadly. And nobody's going to trust the system anymore. So that's an easy way to get rid of the disobedient, the people that question authority. I'm not saying they're going to do that, but what an easy play if you were a psychopath. And it seems like these people are.
If you have the talent to make products that can do that, I'm not sure they have that talent. I'm not sure I believe the gain of function thing. I mean, the more and more I'm looking at COVID, there's some very interesting studies come out. I just saw an interview of a guy I've interviewed, Denis Rancourt up in Canada. We don't see a rise in all-cause mortality from COVID. We see a rise in all-cause mortality from the vaccine program that came. And I wonder, how much of the pandemic was malpractice, which is, really putting people on ventilators killed them, putting them on remdesivir killed them, taking people that were sick in elderly communities and sticking them into nursing homes like Cuomo did, killed them. So it was our treatment and our approach towards the treatment that really killed people. Did the virus itself? I don't know. And I also want to say this because I know we're all afraid of it. We're afraid of the Marburg's disease or the Ebola gets released. There is something you study when you look at this long enough, immunology and virology and how it all works. Viruses get weaker as they evolve in order to survive. So, flu strains, it's why we see a drop in a lot of the measles deaths. A lot of it is the virus gets weaker because it can't actually procreate, it cannot spread the way it wants to. It makes sense for someone that maybe thinking about this for the first time. If you have a deadly virus that within 3 hours has you blowing blood out of your eyeballs and your nose, not to be graphic, but you're going to drop dead on the spot. Any virus inside of that body is going nowhere. It needs you to breathe. It needs to go home. It needs you touching and hugging your kids and your loved ones. And then it needs those people getting on planes and traveling, which means it has to have a long incubation period. It has to really, in many ways, be mild enough that it can spread. That was the secret behind COVID, was the asymptomatic nature. How many people could have it that didn't even know they had it? But if you had an Ebola, that would kill people so quick. It's why it really hasn't ever spread until we brought a couple of those patients here to America. And even they got on planes, trains, and automobiles and couldn't spread it because it kills too quickly, right? So there's going to be some real issues to that horrifying bird flu scenario they want us to believe exists. Because if it did, if it really happened, it really jumped from birds into some farm workers, actually, those farm workers would die, and it probably wouldn't get much further than that. I hate being morbid about it, but this is the actual science when you look at it. The mistakes you would make is if you start vaccinating those farmers for bird flu, now they can carry it like they did COVID and spread it to more people. Vaccines have a way that where they could spread a disease that should be being contained inside of its own radius of death, but it's now spreading across the world because we vaccinated and had a leaky vaccine. That would be possible. But anyway, I'm getting in the weeds. But when you study something for like the 10 years I've been on it, it's super fascinating. And a lot of the things they're trying to scare us with don't actually add up or make any sense.
Yeah. Well, and the COVID jab has proven to be deadly and just so destructive, and it's still on the market and it's still being pushed. So it's sort of frustrating to see that it's so obvious, and it has had all the studies now. The last 5 years, we've seen the detriment from it, and we haven't even seen the full detriment of it, but they still can't quite seem to pull that off the market. So that's a little frustrating.
Well, I think part of that is Donald Trump's attachment to that vaccine. He's been great, by the way, on so many issues. I love that he's demanding that Robert Kennedy Jr. do an assessment right now between other nations' vaccine programs that are half the size of ours. Why are they not dying of disease? Why can't we just go to that vaccine program? So they're doing he's demanding Bobby does a comparative study of all the different vaccine programs around the world and see if we can reduce down to what our neighbors are getting. I think that's awesome. He's obviously supported Robert Kennedy Jr. in this move to remove hepatitis B vaccine from recommendation. No day one old baby needed if their mother wasn't testing positive for Hep B, which is this tiny micronic group of women that unfortunately have that, and the vaccine will still be available for them. So there's a lot that's happening, but I think that COVID vaccine has some politics wrapped around it that most of the other program does not, which is, so I don't know that we can exactly judge that on par with the entire look at the vaccine program right now. But the beauty of COVID is that people are already awake to it. 9 out of 10 people that are eligible to get the recent booster, what do we have, 11 booster shots because the product's so great. But 9 out of 10 aren't getting it, which I think, before we want to get too negative, that means that 9 out of 10 people that believed in the COVID vaccine program, which is the smallest group of believers we have in this country, right? Ultimately, even they are now backing away from that recommendation of getting a booster shot, which tells me more people than anyone wants to admit are actually waking up at some level, at some germinating seed level. There are people saying, I don't want that vaccine. The healthcare workers aren't getting it. So that means your doctors, the people that Sam Harris believes in, they're now wavering, even in their belief of a product that they told all of us to get. I'm still waiting for an apology, still waiting for a sorry from all of these people. But hey, look, they're waking up. So pulling the COVID vaccine or not pulling the COVID vaccine, only the smallest group of very close-minded people are even still getting that vaccine.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that is a nice positive note to it, other than the fact that there was SV40 in it and half the planet got it. But the damage is already
and by
embedded.
the way, does appear to be shedding on us also.
Right.
I don't think but just by not getting that vaccine, you have avoided contact with the manipulated spike protein that's in that, the mutated with the cytouridine and all the issues they did there. It does look like we all need to get our blood checked. And Dr. Peter McCullough, who you've had on, I think he said, has been great at doing research on how you find out if you've got it in you and how you get it out of you.
Yeah. So we haven't touched on your Henry Ford study in this film,
Yeah.
An Inconvenient Truth. Do you mind going through some of the
Yeah.
elements of how it worked, how you set the study up, and what you discovered?
Well, so look, if all the things that I've said here are true, or if you wanted to question if they were true, we need some way to test the hypothesis. Is it possible that vaccines are actually making us sicker, more vulnerable to disease, more vulnerable to death, and actually protecting us? You would need some sort of study to do that. And so the only legal way to test that would be you can only study people retrospectively that have already made their choices. You can't take a group and not vaccinate them because they say that would be unethical. We could get into a deeper conversation about the ethics of that. But let's
Hmm.
just assume that's true, that you have vaccines that exist. Vaccines protect you from measles and chicken pox and everything. So you can't force a group to not get the vaccine. But my children aren't vaccinated, and there's millions of us in the country today that are making that decision. So could you do a retrospective study that compares the health outcomes of the children that are vaccinating to the ones that aren't? We hear lots of stories about the Amish, how healthy the Amish are. They don't really have autism. They don't have ADHD and other issues that we are suffering from. And that's what happened here. I was traveling with the documentary Vaxxed, which I talked about at the beginning of our interview in 2016. We were on tour in a bus that said Vaxxed on the side of it, and thousands of people were signing the names of their children who had died or been injured by vaccines. So it was this traveling memorial, really. But someone reached out to me and they said, I know the head of infectious disease at Henry Ford Health, which is one of the biggest research institutes in the world. And would you like to meet them? I said, sure, I would love to. So I went out to dinner as I was traveling through Detroit, Michigan with Dr. Marcus Zervos, world-renowned scientist, stellar career, amazing career, studying vaccines and doing trials on vaccines and works for the WHO, you name it, great guy, who came to dinner and he actually surprised me. He started out by saying, I watched your film. If I was going to sit with you at dinner, I wanted to see what this is all about. And, it's a compelling documentary, anecdotal stories, of course, but very compelling. He says, but you've been saying something as you're on this tour, because I looked you up online. I'm seeing these YouTube videos everywhere. You keep saying that they've never done the proper science to establish that vaccines are safe. He said, so obviously, was offended by that. And I sit on the biggest databases in the world. So I went through those databases so I could bring you the evidence that apparently you haven't seen. And he said, but I am shocked that I have to sit across from you and tell you you're right. That
Mm.
evidence doesn't exist. We have never done safety studies of any of the childhood vaccines. And he was shocked by it. And he made a point. He said, now, that doesn't mean they're not safe. It just means that we never proved they're safe, therefore we can't say that they're safe. I said, and yet you do every day on the news say that they're safe, and that is not a scientific statement. He's like, no, you're correct about that. He says, but I don't know what I can do about it. It's like, well, I do. Would you ever consider, since you do studies at Henry Ford Health, could you take a database and compare the health outcomes of vaccinated individuals with completely unvaccinated individuals? And he said, yeah, I could do that study. In fact, I said, would you? He's like, yeah, I would consider doing that study. And so that's what's at the heart of this study. That was 2016. I pressured him for several years. He finally did do the study in 2020. And then he didn't publish it. And I was calling him. I was like, Dr. Zervos, I want to see the study. Why don't, it was one of the deals we made, actually. I said, if you're going to do the study, whatever it says, you're obviously pro-vaccine, so I'm sure you're going to do everything you can to make it look good for the vaccinated, but publish it no matter what. And suddenly he wasn't publishing it. And I called him for a year or two. He kept pushing back. Finally, I was going to be in Detroit on a speaking engagement. I said, can we have dinner? So we went to dinner, and I realized this was going to be the last time I would ever have this conversation. And so I took hidden cameras and recording equipment to that dinner. And that is the heart of this film. There's a lot that it gets explained that leads up to why this study is so important. But he actually hands me the study. You can watch it in the films. First time I see it at that dinner, and it is shocking. I recognize why he's afraid to publish it. The conclusion ended up being, by the way, it's about 18,500 kids in the study. 2,000 of them are unvaccinated. So a very robust, big study, the biggest ever done of its kind. Like I said, there's 5 or 6 that have already been done. All showed the vaccinated are the sickest, but this did too. It showed that the conclusion was you're 2.5 times more likely to have a chronic disease if you were vaccinated compared to those that were not vaccinated. So a massive increase, but even worse, 6 times more likely to have a neurodevelopmental disorder if you're vaccinated compared to those unvaccinated. Nearly 6 times the rate of autoimmune disease in the vaccinated compared to the unvaccinated. And probably the most horrifying part of the study is they do a timed date of over 10 years. What would be the likelihood that a vaccinated kid would have a chronic disease and an unvaccinated child? And it discovers that 57% of the children vaccinated will have chronic disease by the time 10 years rolls by, and only 17% in the unvaccinated group. Now, I have to say this study still isn't published. We put out the film. Senator Ron Johnson posted this study on the Senate website, which made it public so that I could legally show people what I knew about it and the hidden camera footage. But everyone needs to see this film, whether you believe in it, whether you think you already know this issue. For a lot of people, I think, that know this issue, they go like, oh, I already got it, Del. But you've never had a tool like this. You've never had it explained, I think, this clearly. And we've never seen someone from the other side, which when you listen to Dr. Zervos in my dinner with him, you hear how passionately pro-vaccine he is. That is the best science you can get. The best science you can get is someone that totally disagrees with your hypothesis and does a study to disprove that hypothesis. That really is the scientific method. That's never happened before. That's all I want. I wanted the other side to look at this. And he ends up producing a study that's the most damning study we've ever seen when it comes to the vaccine program. I think that it's rattling scientific bodies around the world because they know who Henry Ford at Health is. They know who Dr. Zervos is. They see how problematic this is. So huge scientists are now weighing in, like Dr. Peter Gutcha, that was one of the founders of the Cochrane collaboration. He has looked at this study and publicly gone out on X and said, Henry Ford might have a problem with this study, but I don't see how the issues that they're raising explain the size of the differential between the vaccinated and unvaccinated. I want the world to suddenly hunker down now. I want everyone in the world to start demanding, I want a vaccinated versus unvaccinated study. I need to see one right now. And if you're vaccinating, you should ask yourself, why is there no study in the world that shows a comparison between vaccinated and unvaccinated, showing that the vaccinated are the healthiest among us? Wasn't that the entire purpose of this vaccine program? That should be the easiest study to show us. If it's making our kids healthier, live longer, just do the study that shows us that. They can't. Or at least they haven't.
Yeah.
And I find that suspicious. But we should all demand it now. I'm demanding it from Robert Kennedy Jr. That was when I was running with him. That was one of his goals. He's trying to get the databases together to do the biggest study, I think, of its kind like that. But every government should be doing the study. Every single, established medical group like Kaiser Permanente should do this study. In fact, our insurance companies should all do this study. Are we doing something to our kids that's making us pay more for drugs for autoimmune neurological disorders the rest of their lives? Let's cut our insurance costs by stop poisoning our children on the first day of life and from then on. Yeah. So, and inconvenientstudy.com. Everyone can watch it for free. It's funded by my nonprofit. If you want to donate after you've watched the film and think it's important, please do. But it's there for free. You can watch it right now. And just don't be the last person that ever understood this to be true. Ryan, we're winning this. We have the science on our side. So does Robert Kennedy Jr. No doctor, unfortunately for Sam Harris, his problem is no doctor can show up and have this conversation. They won't debate me. They won't debate Robert Kennedy Jr. or Dr. Peter McCullough or Dr. Robert Malone, who invented mRNA technology. They can't do the debate because they have no evidence to their claim that vaccines are safe and effective. And instead, what we have is a sea of sick children that show that this vaccine program is not doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Yeah. No, I love the film, and I will put the link in the show notes. I appreciate the work you're doing, and I always ask everybody, if you were going to die today, this was your last day on Earth, what would you want to say to the world?
You're welcome. No, look, I feel really good about the work that I've done. I feel really good about this team that works with me here at ICANN. You know, all you can do in life is you know, deliver the best, you know, be the best person that you can. I've done my best to keep my, you know, journalism immaculate, and as immaculate as I can. I stand by, you know, every second of everything I said during COVID. There's not a journalist in mainstream media that can say that. They all got something wrong. In fact, they got most of it wrong. They were wrong about the mask. They're wrong about the distancing. They're wrong about locking us down. They're wrong about efficacy of the vaccines. They're wrong, still wrong on hydroxychloroquine, still wrong on ivermectin, definitely wrong on remdesivir. It goes on and on. I feel so blessed that the time capsule of history is all in video. I have been recorded in video on everything I've done. So if today is my last day, I stand by the video record that will sit in the test of time. And anyone that's out there that hasn't heard of us or the work that we're doing, check out thehighwire.com. Check out an Inconvenient Study, but it would be a good day to die. I feel good about everything I've achieved, and I'm not going to stop until that day comes.
I love it. Thank you so much. It's really been an honor to talk to you today, and thanks for all the work you do.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it and subscribe to the show and rate the show. That helps people to discover it. And enjoy the next episode.
What we call reality is in fact nothing more than a culturally sanctioned and linguistically reinforced hallucination of some sort.